Sam Seder, Majority Report. Emma Vigeland off today. Joining me now, the executive editor of the American Prospect, David Dayen. David, let me just congratulate you on your latest contract hire. Joe Biden apparently wrote an article for you. Is that right?
He's some guy he says going to be out of a job soon and needed something to do. And, he wanted to get some writing in, maybe see if he could, polish up his chops on that front.
Doing a little resume padding while he still has the juice.
Something like that.
To his credit.
I mean, if you want the truth, we got a call from the White House. They were interested in placing this. You might have seen today, the president did an interview with More Perfect Union and Fez. It's interesting that they get a clue on this, after the election. But I think during the election there was not much interest on the part of the current Democratic campaign that was running to have Joe Biden out there doing much of anything, frankly. But Democrats certainly have a lot to learn with the communications side of things, and maybe that's that.
I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I understand why they didn't want Joe Biden out there, because, Biden was unpopular and, not necessarily like, the most, showing the most amount of vigor and communicating, but how much of like what Harris campaign was a function of sort of the Biden world? And if this is like what the Biden world, if they're coming not to, I don't know. I mean, there are other publications they could go to there that are more conservative in some respect. They could have, Joe Biden could have decided to, write on Matt Iglesias' Substack. And I can understand Matt Iglesias is a little upset about it, that it didn't happen. But and instead of talking to Faz at More Perfect Union, Faz Shakir was Bernie Sanders' campaign manager, and is and certainly when the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, they could have theoretically gone to Morning Joe or something. I mean, so and they have nothing. Joe Biden's not going to run for another office. I don't think that's a news flash. So there's some like actual, sort of set of beliefs there. Were they of the mind that like this was problematic for the American public? Like, I don't understand how they're operating here.
I mean, I think what's going on right now is that Joe Biden is trying to think about his own legacy and put forward some sort of coherent agenda for what he accomplished and why he thinks it matters. And I think it's important to hear from leaders when they want to do something like that. So we were happy to run it.
Right.
I think there's an inward focus there that has to be understood. He's not necessarily doing this to. I mean, maybe in some respects he's doing it to lay down a marker so that what happens in the next administration, there's at least a clear, it's contrast. Clear what he did and a contrast. So, in that respect, I think there's some potential value to it, but I think the lack of it's the same problem that Democrats have in elections, where they knock on doors for 2 weeks every 4 years and expect people to know, what the party stands for. They know maybe in those 2 weeks, but there's a whole other part of the calendar where they're not doing a lot of communicating with people. And here we have this version of it is, presidents do some sort of legacy essay summarizing their agenda. It's sort of the written version of a presidential library, right? It's just that their version of history.
I get that. I get the impetus, but I guess my point is like he clearly wants to be seen as having done like progressive things
Yeah.
economically, and at the very least. And it's like, okay, why did your vice president run like halfway towards? That's the part that I'm talking about.
I mean, what you're talking about is really, I'm on here to talk about this story about the rudderless ship of the Democratic Party that I wrote, and I think that this plays, very well into that. There wasn't, I mean, the incoherence of the Harris campaign to simultaneously say, I'm going to be very different from Joe Biden, and also I can't think of one thing I would do differently from Joe Biden, is in many ways encapsulates this problem. That there isn't sort of a core set of principles or beliefs. It's all kind of a grab bag. And I appreciated the Biden essay, but it is a bit of a laundry list, right? It's trying to fashion some things together into that sort of backwards engineer this coherent purpose onto it. But look, I mean, Democrats want to do a whole lot more than what Biden ended up doing. This is what he got through, and now he's trying to place kind of a coherent framework on top of it.
All right, let's talk about this rudderless ship because, I'm thinking back to 2 weeks after Barack Obama won the election, and Mitch McConnell gathers everybody in his office and says, we are going to, under no circumstance are we going to give this guy a win. And that was it. I mean, there was like 1 or 2 days of like, well, this is, great that he won, historic, blah, blah, blah. And then after everybody got back from their brief vacations, they're like, okay, we're done. We're not cooperating. And we will feel the impact of that strategy, tactics for decades. I mean, the last part of it, of course, being that third, that seat that they denied Barack Obama on the Supreme Court that, is now the number 6 out of a 6-3 majority. But we have nothing even remotely analogous to that on the Democratic side. And we'll get to that point about like we have people retire and then stick around to sort of continue to mess with stuff.
Right. Yeah. So, it's what you're talking about is called being an opposition party, right? And Democrats certainly have never done that with the sort of brazenness of a Mitch McConnell. The quote I use just from that same period in 2009 in the piece is how he said, we wanted to make sure that nothing was bipartisan, because if it looks bipartisan, then people think that everything's been worked out already and there's not this great debate happening in the country. So we worked very hard to keep our fingerprints off of all of Obama's policies. That's what McConnell said in 2009. Flash forward to 2024, and you have a bunch of Democrats on very discrete policies saying, hey, maybe I'll work on improving the food system. Hey, maybe I'll work on reducing defense spending. Hey, maybe I'll work on this, that, or the other thing, all of which may be noble pursuits, but it certainly doesn't hew to this idea that there's a great debate going on. And I think that the real problem is there's no one with the stature of Mitch McConnell to say, here's how it's going to be. There's nobody within the party that has any kind of respect to enact a strategy and get people to go along with it. And so in the absence of that, you have just a bunch of Democrats freelancing, whether they are saying, okay, maybe I can make progress on my issue, or maybe they're saying, all right, I'm just trolling Donald Trump to the point that when he actually fails, then I can say, see, I tried, I offered the olive branch, and they didn't take it up because they believe in this, that, or the other thing. I think that you get this sense that there's no opposition party, but just 200 people in Washington pursuing their own agendas because there is no leadership in the party right now.
I was particularly sort of struck by your description of how the leadership, Pelosi, Hoyer, Clyburn, stepped aside and then didn't step aside. I mean, this is like, it's,
I've never seen this before. It was almost seen as a given. It was almost seen as a given that when you lost an election and you were House Speaker and the party, the opposition party took over, that you would resign. Like that was actually a tradition until Nancy Pelosi. That in 2006. The Republicans lose the House and Dennis Hastert resigns because he lost the House on his watch. Same with
fun fact, of course, he went on to be indicted and imprisoned for being a child molester. But I mean,
other than that, but the point is that I could go back through non-child molesters, former speakers throughout history, who resigned when their party lost an election. And Nancy Pelosi didn't do that. And not only didn't she do that, she decided not to resign, even though she wasn't the leader of the Democratic Party anymore. And they made up this title, Speaker Emeritus, for her. And she continues to work behind the scenes, moving pieces on a chessboard as if she's in power. And, this really comes to a head with these challenges to the ranking Democrats on various committees. It was very clear to me that Hakeem Jeffries was supportive of the effort to get younger in these committee chairmanships
and we should just
ranking Democrat.
Just the context of this, of course, is that we had Dianne Feinstein, who over her last years as chair of the Judiciary Committee, was hugging Lindsey Graham and sat on potential, sat on the accusations against Kavanaugh for like months and months and months, really completely mishandled that entire thing. In a way that was,
I think the larger context is Joe Biden. We
Joe
literally
Biden
had to get
Ruth
rid of
Bader
our
Ginsburg. I mean, yeah.
So we have this gerontocracy problem within the Democratic Party, and I think Jeffries was really supportive of it. He was silent, but it was clear what was going on. Like he had no problem encouraging, or at least not discouraging, younger members to challenge some of those committee chairs. The problem is that Pelosi got involved and put her thumb on all of it. And it's not just and it didn't matter what side she put it on. Pelosi had a long-standing beef with Gerald Nadler. It goes all the way back to when Nadler beat Zoe Lofgren to take over the Judiciary Committee when John Conyers died. And she saw her opportunity amid this youth movement to stick the knife in Gerald Nadler, and so she did, and she promoted. She gave the blessing to Jamie Raskin to take over that committee, and it was a bloodless coup. Nadler steps down because he sees the writing on the wall. There was another committee. David Scott, who's barely mobile, the head of the House Agriculture Committee, wasn't able to, engage in key actions around the Farm Bill and things like that. Pelosi picked Jim Costa and said, "We want Jim Costa to be the chair over Angie Craig." Angie Craig ends up actually winning that fight. But once again, there's this personality set of conflicts that Pelosi is moving towards. And then finally, there's the AOC situation where ever since AOC got to Congress and held a protest in Pelosi's office, she's clearly had it in for her. And so in the midst of this alleged youth movement, she backs Gerald Connolly, who's 74 and going through esophageal cancer right now, and chooses him over the 35-year-old AOC for Oversight Committee chair. and actually seems to do the most work in organizing the caucus to back Connolly, even though she's like convalescing from a broken hip in Luxembourg, that she fell down a marble staircase or something. And she does it, and Connolly gets the job. And it's like, it's so infantilizing to Hakeem Jeffries to have this, behind the scenes machinations going on with this Cardinal Richelieu figure who can't give up power and has to be at the center of all of these, whatever pursuits that she has. It's really, how can anyone in the Democratic caucus know who the actual leader of the House Democrats is under these circumstances?
That's of the many problems. But let's just back up, at least in terms of Connolly. And my understanding is that he's a very vigorous 74-year-old with esophageal cancer. As far as people with esophageal
that's a direct
cancer,
quote.
I know
that's a direct quote from Representative Don Beyer of Virginia, who said he's a youthful 74, notwithstanding the cancer. Like, I'm not making up that quote. That's what he said.
What is the nature of that committee? Like, I mean, what is it? Particularly if you're in the and we should say the guy who said that quote himself was 74. So, you have a way of assessing, right? Like, because he's like, relative to me, I'm exhausted all the time. I don't even know what I'm still doing here. But he,
right.
But tell us about that committee, because this committee is like, if you were to genetically create a minority leader of that committee, or, it seems to me that everything that you would create would be AOC from the perspective of an opposition party.
Right. I mean, the Oversight Committee has a very wide jurisdiction. Not only can it look at government actions and the operations of the Trump administration, but it also can look at things happening in corporate America and elevate those issues. We've seen drug prices come up in the Oversight Committee. We've seen defense contractors come up in the Oversight Committee, and on down the line. Now, the minority, sort of the ranking opposition member, doesn't have the ability to completely set the agenda in that committee, but several things on that. One, they can elevate issues. They can include witnesses in hearings that the majority decides to hold. They can hold investigations from the minority and try to get documents from people and put out investigations that on various topics. And most important, I think, from the AOC perspective, they can use new media to set the agenda within that committee. And when if and when the Democrats win back Congress, the ranking member would get elevated to the chair position and then would have even more ability to set the agenda. And so, one of the problems, I think, with Democrats is that they don't see the tools of Congress as viable to communicate with the American people on what their job is. And oversight is one of those key ways in which you can really make noticeable what's happening in the country. One of those famous oversight hearings was Henry Waxman bringing in the CEOs of the tobacco companies who said nicotine is not addictive. And, he was able to create a tableau in that way that led to a huge master settlement and hundreds of billions of dollars and massive improvements in public health. That came out of a hearing. And that could happen again if Democrats had someone who was smart and able to work the modern communication system to get attention.
Before we judge, my understanding is that Connolly has a whole operation where he sends out postcards and reports on what's going on. He's got a huge snail mail list of thousands of people where he sends out postcards. It's insane. It really is insane because.
But I mean, it's more insane because, look, I mean, I'm sure, Jerry Connolly has been kind of a loyal foot soldier to Nancy Pelosi. And, you know, Jerry Connolly isn't terrible. He's generally been a pretty good voice in that committee. But the fact that this is all driving on one member's personality conflict, that this is really about who Nancy Pelosi thinks is worthy of certain positions and who she thinks isn't, and it cuts even both ways, whether that means somebody older or somebody younger. That's the problem, that this is what a self-appointed leader of the Democratic Party is spending their time on, rather than how to deal with Donald Trump and how to deal with the near-term challenges of vulnerable people that we're going to have coming up real soon.
And the point, I think it's also important to emphasize, I mean, you said this, but I think it's really important to emphasize this. It is kneecapping Jeffrey's ability to be a leader. I mean, he's not my favorite ideologically speaking, but I want the leadership to be effective. And this is kneecapping. Like, it's basically saying it's every person for themselves here. And you don't have to pay attention to leadership. And here's the other thing I would add. Pat Ryan, if I'm not mistaken, was the one who did the opening speech for AOC.
He was one of them, yeah.
Pat Ryan, I think more than any other purple district congressperson, had a bigger delta between himself and Harris. And there's some things he does that I appreciate. He's up in the 18th district in sort of the Hudson Valley area. If he is not nervous about going out there and associating himself with AOC, he understands. I don't think they're ideologically, they're not at loggerheads, but they're not in lockstep. He's not a member of the squad.
Right.
But if he understands the value of this, it's just, are there other, is there a sense, and I know I saw a piece that said, people are saying, well, AOC will be in the leadership, soon enough and blah, blah, blah. She needs more seasoning, whatever it is. But is there a sense that is there a cohort of people in the House, in the Democratic caucus, who are saying this is just effed up? Is there enough of them going this is just not how you run an effective organization? You don't have somebody who has resigned undercutting nobody would run an organization like this.
I think there are people like that. Maybe it's Pat Ryan, maybe it's Chris Deluzio in Pennsylvania, maybe it's, other people. I do think that we're going to see some factions emerge that are going to speak to this crisis of leadership. But that's what happens in a leadership vacuum. And it breeds people freelancing, and it also breeds people trying to take advantage of it. And some of that might be good because somebody has to take the reins of the party. And some of that might be, the kind of things that we talked about with this memo from this Democratic fundraiser and venture capitalist Seth London, who wants to create a new DLC. Which is the Democratic Leadership Council, which was the centrist lurch to the right that led to Bill Clinton. Leadership vacuums aren't completely anomalous in the Democratic Party, right? After 2004, John Kerry lost and kind of stepped aside, and there was nobody really around that could rally the troops. I think it's worse now. For all the reasons that we've described. I mean, Kamala Harris is socked away somewhere in California deciding whether she's going to run for governor or not. Biden is leaving the public stage. The past presidents, Barack Obama is like a movie and book influencer who sometimes comes back to give a speech every 4 years.
What about Jimmy Carter?
Chuck Schumer.
What about Jimmy Carter?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't? Because
exactly.
right now, why wouldn't you include Jimmy Carter based upon the leadership that we've had so far?
Seriously, but Schumer doesn't really inspire that. Even on the progressive side, Bernie Sanders said, "This is my last campaign." Elizabeth Warren, it's probably her last campaign, what she ran this year. So there isn't anyone really out there that has that juice, that has that gravitas to say, we're going to sit people down and here's what we're going to do. And I think the other part of this is that you don't always need a leader if you have the principles, right? If you have just sort of a massive,
the Democratic Party
principles.
never is, super aligned. It seems to me, that's sort of famously a big tent and multi-coalitional. I think the difference
one of
is
the big things we're missing in the Democratic Party is the decline, dissolution of the Democratic Study Group. Democratic Study Group was, for many years and decades in Congress, was sort of an in-house think tank that generated policy, generated ideas that could be not only turned into legislation, but actually run on as this is what the Democratic Party stands for. And in the absence of that, you have a bunch of silos that come in from the outside. They only look at their narrow issues.
And we don't have anything like that.
And they grab the attention of various individuals because there is no sort of official, the platform doesn't mean anything anymore.
Right, right. But, I'm struck by two things. One, you mentioned Pat Ryan, you mentioned DeLuzio, when they're talking about maybe they are part of a cohort that may have a problem with the lack of leadership. I should just, maybe it's coincidental, both vets, right? Like they understand, at the very least, they understand sort of like hierarchies and dynamics and, cohesiveness of mission. This other part about the lack of think tanks, like we even outside of the Democratic Party, there seems to be a tremendous lack of think tanks. Like, I don't know what happened to the Roosevelt Institute. I don't see stuff from them. Obviously, Think Progress wasn't always necessarily, or I should say Center for American Progress.
Yeah.
I wasn't necessarily ideologically aligned from it, but at least it was like I guess a milestone or sort of like some form of creating some type of structure within the Democratic Party for ideas, because, and I think we've had this conversation before, plan beats no plan, and there are no plans out there. There doesn't seem to be any place that is developing. I mean, frankly, during the Biden administration, most of that stuff was coming from the American Prospect. And no, but honestly, like where, there is no outfit that is turning out general policy, even to the point where you could say like, hey, that's too neoliberal, or that's, too corporate friendly. Like you can't even find that. So there seems to be
that's what the Democratic Study Group did, right? And because it was a little more institutional, it had buy-in and the ability to disseminate that information, across the party. The problem is that we bring people into government mainly on the basis of how much money they have to fund their campaigns. And they don't have sort of a set of beliefs. They don't have very big staffs because the staffs have been gutted. They might have expertise on one solitary issue, but on everything else, they just kind of outsource it to, whoever's incoming information set keeps them in good standing. And, I think that the lack of sort of internal policy making and policy generating engines within the party within the party structure have really weakened that ability. But even more so than that, it's the crisis right now has created a lot of freelancing strategies around, do we work with Trump? Do we try to troll Trump? Do we try to bait Trump? Do we resist Trump? And the fact that everyone's trying on a different pair of jeans means that the public is getting no impression that there's any opposition whatsoever.
Right.
not an organized one anyway.
Well, David Dayen, always a arguable pleasure.
Always a horror to be with you.
Yes. Well, I don't know. Do you have any anything optimistic? Do you think that there is any even nascent movement to sort of get some cohesiveness? And at the very least, I mean, part of the problem with a situation like this is there is no way to change course because there is no course, right? Like if there's a rudder and you're headed towards, a sandbar, at the very least, at one point you can say like, this is where the sandbar is. We need to turn around, go the other direction. But when you're rudderless, you have no way to course correct.
Right. I'll try to offer something a little bit optimistic. So, at the end of 2016, beginning of 2017, there was certainly more of an air of, more along the lines of the McConnell, we're going to resist and make this guy a one-term president. That was certainly kind of the focus there. But Chuck Schumer was talking about, well, maybe we can do an infrastructure bill. If he's serious about it, we can work together on that. So it took kind of a focusing action to kind of put that to the side. And the focusing action was the Muslim ban. I happened in 2017 to be getting off a plane at LAX at the time that was announced and protests were starting. So I actually was randomly, by circumstance, there at LAX at the international terminal when those protests spontaneously began. And it gave people a purpose, and it showed sort of from the bottom up almost to the leadership of the Democratic Party, the titular leadership, that, okay, this is what our people want, and this is what we need to do. There are going to be moments like that early in the Trump administration. They're probably going to be around mass deportation. There are already organizations that are getting ready to, be arrested, to, stand in between ICE and potential people being deported. There's going to be a lot of publicity around this. And there are going to be, and that's not the only focusing point. There are going to be other focusing points. When Trump really started to lose his energy and lose and really fall off on approval ratings in 2017 was after the passage of his tax cuts, which were very unpopular, very tilted towards the wealthy. And this time around are probably going to be even worse because they're going to be accompanied with all these spending cuts, where Elon Musk, the world's richest man, decides what government can't do in order to pay for his tax cut.
Right.
And so, that's going to be another focusing action, an ability for Democrats to have, one thing they can focus on and rally around. So there's going to be moments like that. It's not like Republicans are going to be able to capitalize on this chaos in the Democratic Party. They have a very thin majority in the House. They have a president who on day one will be a lame duck. There will be a lot of jockeying underneath him. They're already mad because of this year-end spending bill at Mike Johnson, who may not survive, really. Watch for that.
Yep.
And they have a lot of internal disagreement. So it's not like Republicans are well equipped or positioned to capitalize on this, but Democrats need to figure this out and figure out who is driving the boat and where they're driving it.
This period of time when Trump has won, and I've been in this situation before, when the Republican has won, but not in a position to do anything that people can respond to. And there's just a lot of recriminations is always the most frustrating and depressing of times. Although we'll see, it could get more depressing. But I love the idea of on day one, Donald Trump is lame duck. I hope somebody runs with that.
Sure.
David Dayen, always a pleasure. Thanks for all of your work in 2024. The Prospect continues to be a daily read of mine, and it's I'm so happy with what you've done with that with that magazine, and look forward to reading it more in 2025.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate all your work in 2024. Keeping this thing going, great stuff. And I do want to say one other quick thing. We had a real tragedy happen at the Prospect. Our writing fellow, Janie Akere, 2 weeks before her 26th birthday, passed away suddenly, shockingly, last week. And so we're kind of dealing with and processing that shock. But I want to thank everybody for the kind words they've said to me and others at the Prospect after we announced this yesterday. And
there's a GoFundMe too.
Yeah.
I saw for
there
her
is,
family.
and there is GoFundMe for burial expenses for her family, and the Prospect's going to donate to that. But I've been overwhelmed by the generosity of people who have already given to that and helped her out, helped her family out. It's sad because, what I love about my job is I get to watch and help young writers develop. And so the fact that I'm not going to be able to see that with Janie is really distressing. And, we have the memory of her, and it's just a really terrible situation. It's hard to even form words around it, but I just wanted to acknowledge that and to thank everybody. If you were out there and you got in touch with me or whatever, thank you very much.
All right, and we'll put a link to that GoFundMe, and really appreciate your time and sorry for your loss.
All right, thanks a lot.
Right. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.